Hello, and welcome to Your Creative and Magical Life, which is hopefully your actual life, but is also this podcast, a show that explores how tarot, divination, and spirituality can help us live a life that sparkles with magic and creativity. I'm your host, Cecily Saylor. Let's make some magic. Hello, creative spirits. Welcome to episode 14. This episode, we are exploring the Wheel of Fortune, which is card number 10 in the major arcana. It's a card about change, it's a card about luck and fate. It's a card that descends from stories and legends of great kings falling from power or sometimes being sacrificed to the great goddess every spring. It's a card that invites us to see how all things are connected. It kind of collapses the space time continuum sometimes. It reminds us that serendipity is real, it's purposeful, even if we can't explain it. It invites us to think about life as much more than a series of chaotic random events, but perhaps something that is partly or fully orchestrated for our benefit or for our learning or for our growth or sometimes for our suffering. And it's a card that reminds us how little control we have in life. It's one of those cards, and many of them do this, but this one especially reminds us that we can only govern ourselves, the way that we speak, the way that we show up, the way that we act and react and create. And this card, thinking in terms of literature, I'm going to The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And one of the key phrases in that book is that God is change. And the Wheel of Fortune really represents that. The wheel is always turning, change is always here, time is cyclical, karma is time and events circling back upon one another. It's a really interesting card. It's right in the middle of the major arcana. It's very symbolic. It's packed with symbolism. So we'll get into that a little bit more, perhaps. But I'm really excited to be exploring the theme of this card and the nature of this card with my friend and artist, Ami Plasse, who is the artist who created the logo for this podcast and who illustrated my tarot workbook, Tarot for Creative Spirits. Ami does a lot of live drawing. He goes out into the world and creates in the midst of events that are not necessarily art related. So he goes out to see bands a lot and will draw them live, and kind of capture their motion on stage and some of their energy and their lyrics. He's drawn talks at conferences or panels or speeches. He's done animations for documentary films and plenty of other things. He's done pet portraits sometimes, but only when he really needs to. And he also, you might find him painting a utility box around Austin. He does a lot of different things very skillfully. He started drawing, started honing his skills in New York City, where he's from, drawing people on the subway as he was commuting. And yeah, Ami's really cool. And I'm glad you're here, Ami. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Cecily. Super happy to be here. Excited to talk about the Wheel of Fortune.
Yes, I am too. I've been waiting for this conversation for a while. So, yeah,
We
here
had
it is.
some COVID interruptions.
Yes, I had a little bit of COVID, I think. But the Wheel of Fortune has brought us to this moment. This is the time. And we'll look at the card more closely in a minute, but I think I want to start with a story about how you and I know each other because I think it has a Wheel of Fortune framework. It's very Wheel of Fortune themed. So is that cool with you?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Do you want me to start or do you want to start?
You can start.
Okay. So I met Ami in group therapy, and this was probably like 5 years ago.
I think it was longer, wasn't it?
It's possible. Time.
I feel like I started therapy in like 2016, and maybe you came in like a year after I started. So like 2017, maybe. Maybe I'm wrong. I
So
don't know.
7 years. Yeah.
Possible.
Lordy, I don't know. It was a while back. It's 4 million years ago, and I joined this group therapy group, and Ami was in it. Ami was already there. I was the new kid, and we were in this group for 3 years. It was an interpersonal processing group, so it was men and women split evenly. We had a male therapist, a female therapist. These details probably don't matter. But over that period of time, Ami and I, of course, got to know each other because you go to group therapy to be very vulnerable and to process your feelings in front of other people and to receive their support or encouragement or to receive their less supportive reactions and deal with your own feelings about that. And Ami, for me, in that time became a really nice, like, it's interesting because we couldn't know each other outside of the therapy room. We're supposed to not talk to each other or not really, like, even know the names of each other's partners and stuff like that. There's a kind of anonymity, even though you get, like, very, uh, vulnerable with people. They start to know, like, some of the things you don't even always tell your friends. So, that's where it started. Anything you wanna say about that, Ami?
Yeah, and I think yeah, it's a strange environment, but I think in some ways it's like this. It's almost like a place where like the things you're working on, you could discover those, but also like put them into practice. Like if you're kind of afraid of doing something in the quote unquote real world, this is like a safe place that, I mean, it's not that there's no consequences for what you do, but there's everything stays in the room. So, you can be more vulnerable, you can be more honest. And I think that allows you to really open up to people in a way that you wouldn't normally. So whether that's good or bad. So I think that was interesting. And I think for our relationship, and you can, maybe you're going to talk about this more, like, I think, we're kind of like, I mean, you're a little younger, but we're kind of the same age, live in a similar world, I think. And I think for us, we were kind of like, there are people who, kind of almost become the proxies in each other's lives to the beginning. So I think that's kind of a role we played a little bit at the beginning. And then, but through it all became very close friends and got to know each other really well just because we were in this environment where there wasn't this fear of like, I mean, for something I was working on, which was taking down the facade that I had built, like in my professional life and which kind of moved over to my personal life, which I was trying to deconstruct a little bit and being able to take that down and just act and be honest about how I was feeling at any given time. And so I think it lends itself to knowing people in a different way. And I think especially people where you can connect with very strongly.
Yeah, and you would sometimes talk about like I love what you said about taking down the facade in your life, and I remember you were struggling with like just trying to make money in a corporate existence and being this creative person, and slowly I would like learn that you were an artist, and sometimes I would share a little bit about tarot, and Ami was always like curious or interested. But one of the other things I was there for was to be a better communicator and advocate for myself and to be a little bit stronger in the face of conflict, particularly with men, I think, who like I tended to sort of defer to or was too afraid to kind of push against. And just growing up, we're in a family where women did that a lot. So I just want to credit you, Ami, with like helping me be emotionally honest with like a strong, cool male figure and building that safety. Like it's something that really lasted. and you were a big part of that. So, and this is also a plug for group therapy for people because I think it can be very helpful, even though it's very scary to like think about talking about your feelings in front of 7 strangers.
Yeah, it could be like a very weird environment, you know? I mean, I remember there were times when we'd go and like we'd sit in silence. Everyone did, even 8 people in the room sitting in silence for like 10 minutes, you know? And it was always this sort of negotiation about who's going to talk first and, who's going to take up. It was an interesting, I totally recommend it too, because, this world is difficult and having that space to work some stuff out is really was great for me, and I was there for a while too.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, and eventually I felt that what had happened is it kind of turned around and rotated enough. So it was almost like a new bunch of people. And it seemed like it was almost like, I mean, everyone's at a different place, but quote unquote, starting again. And that's when I decided I felt like I was ready to sort of graduate, quote unquote, and just move out, you know?
Yeah, it had a Wheel of Fortune quality because like every one session could be like very deep and lots of stuff could come out, and other sessions could be very superficial. And someone would leave or someone would come. And so, yeah, and so I left the group a little bit before Ami, and I kind of wondered I had run into Ami out in the world when we were actually in the group, so I was thought there was a good chance it would happen again. But I didn't know when, and I didn't reach out to you, even though I could have. I just because also I'm not once if you're out and they're in, you're not supposed to be hanging out to protect the sanctity of the group. So I just kind of waited, and then I think maybe a year, 8 months had gone by. I don't remember. You can correct me, but I was giving a talk for this organization called Creative Mornings, which everyone should look into because it's global and it has a lot of free events and it has local chapters. And I was giving a talk for one of their events on the theme of Kismet. And I was, like looking forward to this. I was nervous about it. It was in this office building, and they wanted me to go downstairs to get my picture taken. So I was getting on the elevator, and who comes off the elevator but Ami? And Ami was there because he's the live sketch artist for this organization. So he would end up drawing my talk. And this was our reunion, and the whole thing was about Kismet. So it was just like, as Wheel of Fortune, I think, as anything can get. Anything I left out, Ami?
No, I mean, and I'm trying to remember when the other day, I was thinking about it, whether I knew you were going to be the speaker ahead of time or not, because they do have like a announcement, and usually I pay attention and I'm like, oh, this is going to be the speaker. And then I'm pretty sure I knew you were going to be there. And I think, but I was excited to see you. It was very interesting. I mean, it was very, yeah, I don't know. It was great, it was a great way to reconnect, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it was perfect. And like of all, I mean, I could have bumped into you at a coffee shop, like at this very like kind of everyday kind of way, but this is how we encountered each other. And Ami had left the group by then, so we could just be friends. And so we started hanging out some, and then we've collaborated, particularly around the book. And so I just think that's a fun story. It's a plug for group therapy. It's a reminder that people can come into your life in all of these marvelous and unbelievable ways you would never think of. And so just keep looking forward to that, listeners. There's more magic out there for you. Okay, Ami, let's talk about this card, the Wheel of Fortune.
Cool. I have one too.
Okay, good. Why don't you look at yours, but look at this one as well? I'm holding the Smith Rider Waite, and Ami has Ask the Witch Tarot. And so,
Yeah, mine has a very different vibe than yours.
okay. Yeah, so let me start with the Rider Waite. This one's super symbolic. You have this circular wheel in the middle. You have 4 animals in the corners. They represent Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio. And these are from like Babylonian sorry, Babylonian astrology, I believe. So they're a little bit different. There's this kind of this figure who's circling around the bottom of the wheel. There's a sphinx sitting on the top. There's a serpent descending around the side. And we have four Hebrew letters around the wheel. And in between them are the English letters T-A-R-O, which are letters we also see in the High Priestess. This is up in the sky. This wheel is turning. So there's not a lot to like connect with on a human level. It's just a lot of like symbols. But is there anything that interests you about this one, Ami, or anything you notice?
I mean, I love like, I mean, just to back up a little bit, like one of the things and one of the reasons I love connecting initially with you about tarot is like the visual aspect. I mean, as an illustrator,
Mhm.
always amazing, and just the mythology and the depth of every single tarot card. It's almost like and this might sound silly, but almost reminds me of like when I was a kid and you go to like the dentist's office and you'd have like highlights magazine, or something like that. And you'd have these big like draw illustrations of all sorts of little things going on. And I think the depth and the meaning behind all these different things is really amazing. So I'm drawn to that. I mean, looking at the card itself, I mean, I'm just wondering what they're all doing, like what's going on with all these different creatures and what's their agenda and what's their connection.
Well, let me just say that each of these animals, so these are supposed to be the fixed signs in astrology, and they each represent a different element. So fire, water, air, and earth. And the snake is Set, the Egyptian god of evil, so kind of related to death. And then the jackal-headed one, this red animal humanoid that's circling the bottom, is Anubis, who's the guide to the dead souls and the giver of new life. And it said that Anubis is Set's son. So there's like an intergenerational, like death, rebirth, passing things down the chain kind of vibe with that. And then the Sphinx is representative of Horus, which is Osiris's son and the god of resurrection. So there's this like whole life and death circle. Um, the TARO have to do, I think you can organize these letters in a number of different uh, orders, and they each evoke something different, like law, they evoke the tarot, and the Hebrew letters spell the name of God without the vowels. So it's
Yeah.
like the unspeakable name of God that a lot of, mystics would meditate on this name.
Yeah, it's a Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Thank you.
Well, I went to Hebrew school. I went to Jewish day school and Hebrew school. And so I learned Hebrew. And it was funny because you hear there's like a lot of different names for God, and there's some which are colloquial. You can say like Hashem, like during that's like a little colloquial word to say it in Hebrew. But like, I don't know if I should even say it because I feel guilty still, for whatever. But that represented the way you sound that out was Adonai, and that's sort of the more sacred way to say it, and like the way you'd say it, like if you were like reading the Torah or if you were in temple or something like that, but you weren't allowed to just like bust that out like normally. And it's funny because I think the way that the letters are there, and this could be completely off, but that basically could be interpreted when you turn it into English to say Yahweh. And I think that's why people say Yahweh. But what's interesting is people will say Yahweh is the Hebrew God, but growing up Jewish, like no one ever said Yahweh. Like I never heard that. No one uses that
Hmm.
word at all. So it was kind of interesting. But it occurs to me just the way the Hebrew can be transliterated into English. That is, I think, the way that was the interpretation of people using the word Yahweh. But it just means God. It's not really a proper name per se. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and it is interesting because like then the term God is inscribed on the wheel, which kind of takes me back to that quote, like God is change.
Mhm.
I feel like it's literally written the name of God on the wheel that's always turning. And then I'll just hold up the world, which is the destination cards, we could say, in the major arcana, the final card in the major arcana. And so we also have a circle in this card, which is a wreath, and now there's a figure inside of it. And those same animals in the corners have kind of like matured into a less symbolic version of themselves, into like a real, how they are more truly perceived, I guess, in the real world. And in the Wheel of Fortune, they're like all reading books. They're like kind of studying. They're representing the four evangelists. And so this is kind of like seen as the vision. The card before this is the hermit. Like this is the vision the hermit is having. But by the time we get to the world, the vision is like actualized into this kind of integrated place. So yeah, that's a lot. That's the deal with the wheel.
I kind of love that because I think I mean, just reminds me of like the conversations I've had around like when my one of my kids was getting bar mitzvahed, like in like we go to a very progressive, like introspective temple in Austin, and the rabbi was like, was speaking about how like a lot of the teenagers will come to him and be like, Rabbi, I don't really believe in God, and like um this whole notion of it, like, and they were struggling with that. And he was like, God can be for you what something in your life, what's important to you, the things that matter to you that you find strength in all these other things in, and like grounding them in the reality of their lives, as opposed to it being this sort of either abstract concept or this sort of like very specific personality that some religious denominations sort of ascribe to. God said this, God wants that, God wants you to win your football game if you pray real hard, so like that's what I love about that. And I love how it becomes grounded in that life. It's interesting. This morning I'm painting this one box. It's over by the highway.
A utility box.
Yeah, utility box. And when I paint the boxes, a lot of times, there's already graffiti and other things on them. And I like to incorporate those things into, what I'm doing. Like I don't like to just pave over it. I like to incorporate them into the art that I'm creating. So it's building on what other people have left there for me. And there was a quote from Jeremiah in there that someone left, and I'm not really a religious person who quotes the Bible and stuff, but I wanted to leave it in there. And actually, the person who wrote it was is a homeless man who lives right by there, and we've been talking like as I've been painting. He comes by and stuff, and so I was going to reinterpret it and for my own purposes, but I decided to leave it. But it said God, basically it was the gist of it is God is the way,
Mm,
and I kind of put a question mark at the end of it, being like Jewish, like everything's a question, you know.
mm.
But incorporating that into it is kind of an interesting. So it's kind of interesting that you brought that up now, because that was something I'd been thinking about this morning, the way that he had left this thought into this and how I left it into there. So I don't know. I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but I found that connection kind of cool.
Yeah, that feels like another Wheel of Fortune synchronicity. And it makes me think about that quote. Like if I saw God is the way out on like a church sign or even graffitied like that, I would think it was someone being like, God is the path, like get on the God path, everybody. God's the way. But now talking about it, maybe it's sort of saying like the way that it goes is like God, like this life, the way that it falls apart, the way that it comes together, the way that we like enjoy, the way that we suffer, like that is God, which I think is like kind of like that God is change. Like it's in everything, you know.
Yes, for sure.
We're gonna come back to your utility box work project in just a little bit, but I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what your art practice looks like now, because it does have a lot of components and elements, and it seems to me quite multifaceted. So, how would you describe where you are in your creative work?
Um, I think I'm both like pretty far along in the place I want to be, as well as sort of in a weird liminal space, sort of. And I say that because for a long time, I worked in like sort of the quote unquote commercial creative field. I mean, I guess I still do, but I worked as an art director and a creative director, and I worked at ad agencies and software companies and such. And I think I enjoyed the work sometimes, a lot of the time actually, and worked with doing creative work with other people. What I didn't enjoy so much was, a lot of the politics that went around with it. I mean, every job has its politics, but I think advertising in particular is kind of rough. And I found actually the software startup space to be a little bit rough in different ways. So I always kind of felt like I was, I did this artwork on the side, I kind of created, but I felt like I was kind of working towards a time when I'd actually be like doing the work that I wanted to do and feeling like I'm making an impact, as opposed to it being sort of like a little bit of a side thing, which I did when I had a moment. And I kind of feel like I'm at that place now. Like I feel like I'm doing a lot of work, which I think is important. And I feel like I've kind of in myself understanding what I want to do as opposed to just experimenting. And I mean, there's always experimenting, there's always growing, and there's never an end. But I feel like I'm in that place now, if that makes sense, you know. But at the same time, I feel like in a sort of a liminal space because, as you mentioned, I do all these different things, and I think what I kind of crave now, at least for a period, is some sort of focus or kind of calming of all these like different sort of strings and things that are happening. I think figuring out one or two of them which I can really land on and spend some time on, because I think that eventually that you want to be able to do that, and there's a certain chaos to the way I'm living right now in my artistic practice, and it's just a little bit too much. And people would say, well, why don't you just pick one and go? And it's like like it's sort of figuring out which is going to sort of have an impact, and also just being a working artist in life, like which can be like financially stable enough, or at least a few things financially stable enough to you know support just living your life, paying your mortgage, paying for your kids for food when they're going to college, all sorts of things, which are life is expensive. So figuring out how you can make it work financially, and also while doing something which is impactful and important, so those are the balances I'm looking for. So I feel like I'm in a space where I'm trying a lot of things and putting a lot of things out there, and I'm sort of seeing kind of where the world is going to take me from there. I mean, not that I've left it up to the world, but there's a certain amount of leaving it up to the world. You do. My thesis is always you put out what you want to put out, and there's a certain amount of like whether the world is going to accept it and take it and see what happens.
Yeah, because can you say a little bit about, I mean, I said some of it in the introduction, but it was probably not how you would say it or represent it. But can you, yeah, just kind of describe as a working artist some of the things you can do and you do to get paid for, like all of those different threads you're kind of trying to weave?
Yeah, I do. I mean, my main focus is sort of like live creating and drawing out in the world, so I do the way I actually make a lot of my income is through live corporate events. So I'll go to a conference or meetings, and or sometimes it's not necessarily corporate, it's some sort of organization. I do some work for UT where it's in education, and so it's it's in academia, but basically there's people who gather together as an event. There's an exchange of ideas or an exchange of creativity, and I capture that live. I'll draw the people, the focus on the people. I'll capture some of the ideas, the sort of energy and environment. I call it sort of it's like live expressionistic drawing, so I'm not like a purely like capturing every detail exactly as it is, but I capture the energy, the people, how I kind of experience them. So that I do, and a lot of it is done as a sort of activation or interaction at the event. Sometimes they'll project what I'm doing live, or run the projections back between sessions or performances. And then what they do a lot of times post event is they'll take all the work that I've done and use it as content for their different media channels. Like when they send the follow-up emails, like having this really kind of engaging visual to connect with the content they're putting out, or using it in their social content, or, some of it will turn into animation or video pieces, which they'll use, in any of their different channels. So basically you have this event and then you create all this amazing content, and the work that I do helps people engage with that content throughout the year and post event. Also, sometimes they'll do things like take the work that I do and give them as gifts to people who've contributed as sort of a really unique connection to the experience, as opposed to like a Yeti tumbler or something like that.
Yeah.
And there are various other things that people do with it, but those are kind of the main interactions. So it's kind of like the interaction on the ground, and then what happens afterwards. I also do live art events where I create sort of a framework for creativity. So it could be anything from like the outline of a mural, so like kind of a giant coloring book page, or creating like basically the same thing for frames of animation. And at the event, I'll have people come and create within the framework that I've given them. But within the framework, there's a lot of room for individual expression. Some people, and this is not always people with a creative background, actually the majority are not quote unquote artists, although I kind of feel like everyone can be an artist to a certain extent. But for them, at the very basic level, it can just be like going out and coloring something in, and just the simple act of putting like a analog piece of like media, like a paintbrush or a marker or whatever it is to surface, like there's a certain transformation that happens within people, which is really exciting to see. And then for some people who have a little bit more going on, of things they want to get out creatively, they can start to add like their own little piece of artwork within the artwork. So painting a little section of the mural, adding a poem in there, or a little mini illustration or something abstract. When we do the animation, I basically have each person color or paint an animation frame, one frame in this animation, and they can again add all these different things, and they can add their own style, they can add their own creativity into that piece. So and we do this as a group, and it's both a really great balance of giving people a place to individually express themselves, and also just the opportunity to do something creative and do something artistic when they would be normally doing that. And it's also working towards this sort of communal group project. I think the idea of community creating together is really exciting to me. I mean, when you want to create something amazing, and artists sometimes get a little bit in their own head, and there's a certain narcissism I think is just inherent to every artist, who at least are the ones that you've heard of, because if they wouldn't have a little bit of narcissism, you never would have heard of them. So like, not in a bad way, but just that's kind of it, hey, look at what I've done. But the idea of a community coming to it, like the power of that is really exciting to me, and to seeing what can happen there is just like amazing. So that's another part of my business. So I'll go to an event, or like last couple of weeks ago, I was at a few weeks ago, there was a party at Austin City Hall. It was called Party at the People's House, but the theme was "We All Belong." It was an anti-hate messaging, and I just created this group mural. It said "We All Belong," had a bunch of people on it from various walks of life, and just everyone came together and created this really beautiful piece together. And like the way people would just join together, people who normally would never talk to each other, interact with each other, all of a sudden we're just kind of like connected. So that's another aspect of my business, doing those kind of events, whether they're public or team building or a party or whatever. And again, after the event, they have this beautiful piece of art. They can use it as content in their channels, and all the marketing spiel that I can push out to y'all. And then other parts of my business, I do animation work. As you mentioned, yeah, I've done some work recently. I did work for this documentary piece, and it was basically little transition animations, little things that were integrated into the rest of the live shot documentary to kind of help tell the story. And it was really interesting. It was shot in West Texas, and for me, it was interesting. I got to use sort of the landscape of West Texas as the character, which was really kind of interesting. So kind of bringing that to life in a different way. I also have worked on some films. I worked on a Richard Linklater film a few years ago, Apollo 10 and a half. It was a full length animated feature. I was part of the team. It was actually an interesting time, because it was sort of like I was working full time on this movie for a while. For the first time in a while, I was working full time, and working with a group of people, and it was actually very predictable. Every day I knew I was going to get up for about 9 months and draw some scenes of animation, pass them on. And very much in some ways it was a little mundane, but it also kind of quieted my mind for a while, which was kind of a nice respite. And then and I've done various little animated projects. Sometimes I'll go out and draw a band, do a bunch of quick drawings, and then make an animation. I'll capture wild audio. I've done a bunch of drawings of Cecily that I cut to some wild audio of her and made a little animation of her. So yeah, so the animation's a part of it. And then I do some more traditional illustration, like posters and gig posters, and illustrating your book. And then I'll sometimes just do random stuff like some design work here and there as well. So it's a lot of things. And I'll do workshops. I'll take all these things that I know how to do, and I'll do like drawing workshops, little animation workshops, again, all designed to give people who are not quote unquote creative or don't have an artistic background an ability to do that without fear, and to really enjoy the process of making and creating things and not worry so much about doing something perfect. Because anyway, so there's that. And I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to let you take a breath and let you kind of jump in. So that's kind of what I do, for quote unquote money, for how I make a living. It's a lot of things.
Yeah. And on the one hand, it's amazing that you're so versatile and you can take your art into a corporate space and kind of maintain the integrity of your like style and your technique and your approach, but you can also like take it out into the community and like bring people together through your art, plus all the things you said. There's a lot of vectors, so that gives you a lot of opportunity to like share your art or to make money with your art. But it gives you, I know it's something you've struggled with, is like the abundance of choice, or like which of these it's very difficult to be animating and going out to a corporate event and hosting a community guided art project all at the same time. And not that you do them all at the same time, but um before we talk about how you kind of choose or try to determine which things to emphasize, I'm curious how you would articulate what makes it meaningful for you. Like when you were in corporate and it didn't feel meaningful, and coming to work for yourself and trying to stay focused on creation that does feel meaningful to you. How do you know like what's the meaning for you in it?
I mean, I think the biggest part of it, even like in a corporate setting, is seeing the impact it has on people, like when people engage with your work. And you can like, sometimes people come up to you, and every artist has this, be like, someone will say, I could never draw that. And you're like, well, that's why I do this for a living, and, but people, have really genuine like reactions where they're sort of like, I mean, like I said, you can kind of see it in people's faces when they're creating and how they transform, or even when they see something that you're doing and they're like, oh, like it kind of opens their eyes to something they hadn't really thought of before. Oh, a way of seeing something that they hadn't thought of before. So I think those are the things that really inspire me to do the work that I do. And, and when I used to live in New York and draw people on the subway, like most people do not look at the subway as like a positive thing or a positive. It's a necessary evil of a place to get from point A to point B. But part of the work that I was doing and some of the reactions I got is like, you can look at this as a beautiful and interesting and place where there's all sorts of interesting people and interactions and, fleeting moments that you can kind of capture in this sort of like, otherwise this place which is sort of utilitarian. So I think that was, and in Austin, like I think part of me when I moved here and I really got engaged with the music scene is I was just like, and people I think here might take it for granted a little bit, but like it's really unique and robust, and like not many other places have the level of not only just music but great music and like amazing people doing really interesting things, and how accessible it is unbelievable to me. And so I think part of the reason I do the things that I do is I want to celebrate that and sort of elevate that to a point of people. I'm like, this isn't normal. This is extraordinary, and you should be paying attention. And I'm inspired by the energy of the people too. I mean, I think when I'm drawing music, when people are on stage, I think sometimes they're like the truest version of themselves, when a musician is performing, and just being able to like get into the connect with the window, see into that window of that person is just like kind of almost a very what's the word, like, it just it's a sort of it's just beautiful moments that you can, that those are the things that kind of inspire you to come back. And yes, run out in the middle late at night, and when you should be sleeping and you have to get up, those are the things that bring me out there, because I want to witness and experience that stuff. And those are things that you can't experience sitting at home watching it on TV, or whatever. I don't even really like going to shows at big venues, because I feel like I'm so far away from an artist. Like when I go to some of the small clubs in Austin, I'll be drawing them from 5 feet away, and just I can see, the fingers, how the fingers moving on their guitar. I can see, their expressions on their face when they're singing, and how their hands are gripping the microphone, and I can see the drummer, and like, yeah, it's just like it's a very beautiful experience. If you think about those moments where you find God, is like I've found those in those moments, just experiencing and drawing them, and kind of connecting with them that way. So, that, I mean, I think I've just gone off on a tangent, but those are the moments that inspire me to do the work that I do. The change that I can see in people and how they react, and just like, and the things that I can experience that I you know, don't in my normal life, was a big thing for me.
I love how you're describing that because it feels like when you go to shows, you feel like something magical is happening there. And, there's a way to like go to a show and just like get drinks and sort of enjoy yourself, but you appreciate the technical skill and like the energy of it and the synthesizing of these different voices and parts that are coming together and how it kind of animates a whole space. And then at the same time, interestingly, you're like trying to capture that magic in a two-dimensional frame, which you do very skillfully because I was gonna like as you were talking about animation or at some point in this conversation, I was just thinking like how your illustrations in live drawing like look like you're catching the frame of an animation, like you're in this tiny moment was captured, but like things are very moving and fluid, even though they're also very sharp, which just like style wise is really impressive. But I also notice, and just from like talking to you over time, that when you go to shows, there's, like, the magic the musicians are making, there's the magic you're making by trying well, not by trying, but by capturing what they're doing in your art form, but then there's, like, another layer of magic because people will often interact with you because of what you're doing, like, they see you drawing on your iPad or your sketch pad, and then you're having conversations with people that you might not have been talking to. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of artists, I think, want this kind of like privacy or they don't want people like looking over their shoulder while they're drawing. But what is it like for you to have your art as like a vector for it's like kind of like a lantern that attracts people?
Yeah, I mean, I do like talking to people at shows, and I like when people come talk to me. I think part of it is like it's a way to connect with a lot of people, connect to the community, and I think part of me doing art out in the world is seeing how art can make a connection with someone you never would have a connection otherwise with. Um, and I'll actually give you a much more mundane example later, but like, um, it does create these really interesting conversations, and makes me feel, when I moved from New York, like New York is a place I lived my whole life, and I had a certain old inherited community there, but I didn't feel like as actively engaged with community there as I do when I am here. And here, I feel like I can go out and really meaningfully connect with people through it. And so, yeah, people will come talk to me. They'll ask me about some of them are artists themselves, and they want to learn, what I'm doing, just questions. Some people just love the way you can look and see something very different and interpret it in a different way, you know. So and it just feels good to be able to connect with people who are making it happen, the people who are coming. It's sort of this like whole circle of people. So it's really exciting for me to connect. I mean, sometimes I mean, it's a lot sometimes at the show just because I'm very stimulated in a lot of ways. So every once in a while I'm like, think about when I used to just go to shows and just like listen to the music, then leave, but it makes it really feel meaningful to me, like, just full circle. Like there's something there. And a lot of times with your art, and I think when artists feel really down, they feel like, I'm putting all this effort into this, I'm doing all these things, and what does it really mean for anyone, and like, what's the point? And when these things are happening, there's it's funny because when I'm worried about like money or things happening in the world, but when I go out to a show and all these things are happening and clicking, none of that stuff seems to matter, because this is, these things seem real to me. The connections I'm making with people, the bands, and how I'm connecting with them, and what they're giving and what I'm receiving from them. It all seems really real. That's in those moments I'm like, oh, I never question what I'm doing at all. Like, should I be doing this? Where am I? Then you go home and you wake up in the middle of the night, and all those questions come back. But at least for those moments, and I guess that's what life is. It's in relishing and identifying those moments, and holding on to them.
Hey, friends. Sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to take a quick moment and invite you to join our Patreon community. Inside the Patreon, you get access to all of our workshops. You automatically have seats in any upcoming workshops. And the next one I'm hosting is called Animals of the Tarot. And we're going to be looking at the domesticated animals in the tarot. There's a lot of people in this community who are friends to animals, lovers of animals, animal advocates. So I wanted to bring us together and explore some of the animals in the tarot, and this will be an ongoing series. So this time we're looking at the domesticated animals. We'll look at the wild animals in the tarot. We'll look at some of the cryptids or the hybrid animals in the tarot. So if you become a member, you just get to come to those if you want to. And you get the recordings of these workshops. Plus, you get access to the whole library of workshops that I've done in the past, which includes workshops on each of the suits in the tarot, as well as the major arcana. I have a workshop called Writing the Hard Parts, which is about creating ritual for yourself around writing emotionally loaded material. I won't make the whole list for you here, but there's a variety. They have to do with creativity, tarot, and magic. Also, for members, once a month, there's a raffle giveaway where you can win a 30-minute tarot reading or a Mystic Messages deck or a copy of my book, Tarot for Creative Spirits, which Ami illustrated. There's lots of benefits to membership, and you can join for just $6 a month, and you're supporting the work of this podcast when you do so. So if you're enjoying these conversations, if this feels like the right vibe for you, there's some really cool people who you're going to meet when you come step inside. Once you're ready, you can be shy for a long time, but there's a lot for you there, and I hope you'll check it out. You'll find the link in the show notes. Yeah, I think you hit on it exactly. Like that's what we're looking for in life, is that sweet stuff where all the concerns of what you said earlier, living being expensive, kind of recede. And I love what you said, like this seems real to me. And so I want to kind of go toward the time when you were in corporate work and doing the ad agency stuff and creative direction and not feeling super satisfied. And I know it was like a really big scary thing to walk away from that, but I'm wondering, like, what's that story for you? How did you decide it was time? Was there a Wheel of Fortune moment where you were like, okay, I'm done? How did you make the move?
First of all, like, there was a lot that I did like about that work. Like, I liked being part of it. especially, earlier on, just being part of a creative team, especially when other people were supportive and doing interesting things. And I learned so much from people. And, later on when I was manager, creative manager, like the team that I had and the things that they would create. And I really saw my role as helping people being creative and helping them facilitate. And I love that part of the work. And, if that could have just been it all the time, I think I could have, I'd stay with it. And I still do projects like that sometimes too. So it's totally, but I think after I worked in advertising for a long time. You have to deal with clients, you have to deal with internal people, there's a whole kind of string of things, and everyone's a little like always nervous, and everyone's sort of like figuring themselves out and trying to secure their position in things. And I had been in client meetings where, the clients in the room, different client part of the company, would just be arguing with each other and fighting. And I'm just like, how can I possibly, like, the ability to make something important and work well and like stay true to the idea, the concept is so difficult, and it's so hard. And then, you go from darling, even when you actually are successful and something launches and does well, you can go from darling to dog, I think is that the expression, in like a day. It's great. The next day it's like, well, this and that, it's like, and I feel like sometimes you can do 95% the way I really felt towards the end is that you could do 95% of the things right and hit on cylinders, and someone's going to like be telling you about that 5%, and that becomes a whole thing, and you're just like, nothing's perfect. Creative process never perfect, but like it just after doing that for on and off for 20 years, it just starts to really, dig at your personality. Part of what I was doing with group therapy is just like dealing with like how that affected my personality. I feel like it would go into my personal life, and I felt like I was starting to create these facades within my personal life, and I couldn't be honest, and obviously that's not good in a relationship. And so I remember a conversation I had, not my last corporate job, but the second to last one, when I overheard two like kind of younger, I think they were like project managers or something, and they're having this conversation. They're like, I can't believe that the client did that, like, making some irrational decision, or that they thought was a rational decision, or totally like flipping something on its head at the last minute and just burning it all down. And I just thought to myself, why can't you believe it? Of course they were going to do it. They always do shit like that, not always, but like, and I just thought to myself, I can't go, I don't really, how long am I going to be in this cycle for? And my last job was a little different. I was working in-house at a software company. And in some ways it was nice because there's a little more internal control and there was less clients. It was internal clients. So we had that, but I just, again, felt that whole thing of like, no matter what you do, things will launch. They'll be great. They'll actually have good numbers, like business numbers that you could say, this is successful for what it is. And no matter what, someone in the organization is going to be like, well, I didn't like it, or I didn't understand it, or this person's not doing this. And it could be based on some anecdote or totally unrelated or unconnected to reality sort of information they have or whatever it is. But then you have to deal with it. And it's just like digs and it picks away at your soul. And so I will say that most of my jobs, and the last two jobs I had, at least, actually in New York, this never happened. I don't know what it was. Maybe I just was more adept to the culture there. But in Austin, my last two jobs, I worked about 3 years, and eventually I got kicked to the curb. I think I definitely carried a certain sort of amount of personality and style with things, which I think people liked and like attracted to. But then what would happen is invariably there'd be a big shift in the organization. And when there are big shifts in the organization, generally people make decisions of starting fresh and they want something new, And so if you're somebody who kind of like flies under the radar or isn't associated with anything specific, I think you can kind of weather that. But like for someone like me, rightly or wrongly, they'll be like, well, we're changing direction. You're very connected to this old direction of way of doing things. So peace out, So after my last one, and I was kind of upset in a way because I was like, I felt like I had done a lot in the company and transformed the creative. I mean, if you looked objectively at the stuff that they were doing when I got there compared to when I left, and it wasn't just me, it was my team as well and the people I worked with. But I felt like I was a big part of that. So I was a little bitter, although I will say when I got kicked to the curb that day. It was a beautiful September day. Got on my bike, rode around the lake. I felt great. It was amazing, you know. But after that, I left there. I mean, part of me was like, I'd been getting sort of like little side jobs doing the illustration, live illustration work. People were responding to it. And I was like, I did sort of try to get another job. Like I was up for a couple other creative director jobs. I mean, I have 3 kids, you know, you know, there's a lot of financial pressure,
Your life
you
is
know.
real expensive.
Yeah. And there's this like dream when you're a creative, oh, I can go out, I'm going to do it. But like you realize how hard it is to replicate the kind of money you get at just whatever job,
Yeah.
plus insurance, and then, you know, whatever else to get to that place. It's not easy. So, but you know, I tried to get a couple of jobs. I think I was up for another job, and it was the same thing. I was up for a creative director job. It was kind of similar to the one I just done. I was like, listen, I can bring all these learnings that I have this last job to you guys. And everyone was really excited. And I think at the end of the day, they basically were like, well, that's great. Can you also do not only be a creative director, we also want you to be like the head of production and scheduling and all this other stuff. And basically setting me up for a job that was impossible, you know? And I was like, I
Mhm.
could have tried to take in that job and tried to figure it out, but I would have been I just would have been a wreck, you know, like, and I knew it. And I also knew that I wasn't going to be able to do the work successfully and at a high enough level that would not, that, you know, because we take work very personally. And so if I'm pushing out mediocre work, no matter if it's my fault or not, it's going to, again, start to really eat at my soul. So I just knew, like, and I was like, no, I can't do that. And nobody can do that. You know, if you're going to someone to hire someone who says they can do that, they're not going to, everything is going to suffer, you know. Jack of all trades, master of none, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And, you know, and I tried a few times, but I just realized, like, I think I was kind of done with that. And I also think that, like, that industry was done with me, you know, like,
Mm.
I think people knew me. They knew the other work I was doing. Like, they just didn't see me in that way anymore. So I just, you know, tried to embrace what the universe was telling me, you know. And you know, I was, you know, it was hard and it was a struggle being on my own, but there were also successes, and there was like good feedback from the world about the work that I was doing. Whereas in that other arena, all I got was negative feedback, you know.
Yeah.
Negative feedback, and also just poison environments. And you know, do a lot of corporate work, you know, and I like the clients I work with, and they treat me well, you know. But
But you're on the outside.
yeah, I go, they hire me because they like the work that I do, not because I'm a body who needs to can constantly morph to whatever.
Right.
We do the work, I deliver it. I've almost always had great experiences with clients. And then I say goodbye until they're ready to hire me again, which is hopefully happens a lot. And with a lot of clients, it does. And that's great. But I don't have to, you know, have that daily negotiation. And, you know, I understand that people do it. Some people just do it better than others. Some environments are better. Some of it's the luck of the draw. Sometimes you work with really great people and they're great organizations. And I think some of the organizations I've worked for, at least when people know the leadership, even if they're not necessarily the nicest people or it can be rough, at least if they know what they want and have a vision for what they're trying to do, then you can get with that and you can get behind it, you know. But I think sometimes you work for an organization which seems like the goal is making money. I know they all have to make money, and I get that, but that can't be the goal. That has to be like why we're doing it. But you know, if that's the only sort of cohesive idea behind what's driving the company, then it's just like, what am I doing? You know, like, what am I doing? What can I, as a creative person, what am I striving for? What can I grasp onto? What's my inspiration? There isn't any, you know, so it's a tough place to be. So, so I think it was a mixture of sort of like me having gone through this cycle so many times and really feeling the effect it had on me. And then also just, I think, having made enough of an impact in the other work that I do, that I just don't think that I was seen in that corporate way anymore. Like if I apply for a corporate job, like a creative director job, and they Google me, they're going to come up with a little bit of my corporate work. They're going to come up with my illustration work, my animation work, like my workshops, all these other things that I do. And that's what they're going to see me in, you know, unless someone really knows you and knows you well, like they don't see, people don't see you as that. And I've kind of come across this in my career where I've had to almost like channel some of my different work, because if you throw too many things at a person at once, they're like, I don't even know what to do with this. Is it, did they do this? Did they do that? I don't even know. Um, so I kind of feel like that's just where the world is. And I need to go with that flow and, make the best of it, make it successful and celebrate it.
Yeah, I mean, every company is driven by money, and capitalism, like, sort of directs that. And that's kind of why we get these experiences in the workplace, in a profit driven workplace, let's say, but even nonprofits have to chase money, And so, like, when markets change, when trends change, when the culture changes, like, the company will sort of tilt the wheel this way and then tilt it that way. And there's like layoffs right now, and then there's hiring and, yeah, like leadership turnover. And you just get, even when you're with well-meaning people or people who are doing their best, like over the years, you just get like jerked around a lot. And your creative work, like this stuff that is very authentic to you, and like talents and skills that you've developed through like passion and attention, are just sort of like sucked out of you. And then you get told, well, the client, like, nah, So yeah, like, I think it sounds like this was a story where the wheel kind of turned for you at the right moment, when you were starting, you were at your limit, and you had built up a level of work that you could venture out and try and do, like, make money for yourself doing what you love, but without those same constraints and those same kinds of energy
Yeah.
drains and affronts.
Yeah, I will say I also, and just to, I think what made it clear at that point is like I had a real like thesis of like what I could do and how I could make it successful. I don't think I
Mm.
had that before. Like my last job, we did a lot of live event work. We put on a big summit every year. We put on a big South by event. So like through that, I got to see like how like those kind of events, it's always creating something interesting, compelling, and some engagement is always really interesting. And that's what people were really craving and looking for. And also that all these companies, especially in this, like everyone's got 16 different channels, they got to put content out on them. There's this need for content. I knew when we did these events, I captured as much photography and all sorts of stuff as I could so that we had content through the year. So I feel like at that point when I left that job, it had actually prepared me to build this kind of business use case. And that was different than like before when I had left the job and I'm like, oh, I could just go freelance or whatever. Here I was like, this is a specific need. And
Mm.
this, I can, here's a logic to what I'm doing. And I also understand, and I made a lot of connections in that industry. So I could speak to people and work with them and sort of get feedback and help to build my models and stuff like that. So that was also a factor in why that at that point was I decided, hey, I'm going to try this out. And I had a very specific goal in place. And I think that helped me kind of meld that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think, so like a layoff, when you get laid off, and that's how I ended up taking my business full time, can feel very devastating and very scary. And it legitimately is. But yeah, I like how you're pointing out there's sort of like a confluence of things that set you up for that. And one is the layoff, like the thing you can't really control. And then, attempts to get, I also made an attempt to get hired again, but didn't get the job. And I was like double checking the universe, like, are you sure? But then there's also what you're talking about, how the series of events leading up to that moment had kind of created this on ramp for you, both in terms of like skill development, seeing the need, um, having a certain practice with certain things. So like you're prepared at that point. And there were things you were doing outside, like you had in your freelance work or art as a side hustle, let's say, like some things were going well and you could see this like appetite for it. And in my case too, like this had been typewriter tarot was a side hustle for like 5 years. I got laid off. There was something in my practice that I was ready for and ready to add. And it's not all like I still struggle with the money part. And you and I talk about that a lot. But I'm just pointing out to people to sort of be on the lookout for those confluence of events and how things kind of coincide as like a real nudge for you. And I also want this to be a plug for starting your thing sooner rather than later. Like, I know, like, the sooner you start and you get to practice and do it in a small way and sort of build it and grow it slowly, whatever it is, whether it's a business or a hobby. I mean, I guess I am talking specifically about like money and income, but if there's a passion you have that you would like to support yourself with eventually, I think a lot of people put it off until when they have more time, they have more confidence, they have more skill development. And I just want to say, like, start now because you can start setting it up now. And then when the wheel turns, as it may or may not, you just have more to work with. So I'm glad you said that, Ami.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add too is like, I think if you're working a corporate job or, working in a bigger business or whatever it is, like there's a lot you can learn there. I think if you pay attention, that can be applied. I mean,
Totally.
and I almost think it's, I mean, if you get out of, if you go out into the world, become an artist and you're successful right away, awesome. But I think there's something to be said from working in these environments because you learn a lot. Like I learned, especially in some of my last jobs, like there was a big sales team and like I worked really closely with some of the sales guys. And at the beginning, I was like, oh, this looks like a frat party to me. But, some of them were really smart and interesting and they really valued and appreciated the work I did. And we really partnered together. But I got the chance to see how they would sell themselves and sell products out there. And, I think it's important as an artist. And what's really hard as an artist is how do you sell yourself? How do you get out there and say,
Yeah.
this is what I articulate really clearly what you can bring to somebody, stand behind what you do. How do you present that so people can understand it? And be bold about it because as an artist, a lot of times you're like, oh, please just buy my artwork. I'm so happy you paid me $100 for this drawing. But in reality, there's a value behind it and making sure that people understand that and appreciate it. And just presenting, talking to audiences, talking out to people, learning how to market yourself, I mean, especially is really hard. I mean, there's a lot of pounding the pavement. I still don't think I've mastered this at all, but like being able to get people's attention, and identify like the people who you need to talk to, who's going to be good to connect with. I learned early on that there's 4 types of people that I deal with. One person is somebody who is an immediate prospect and a good idea. They're gonna hire me for something probably, and they're really interested. They show interest. Someone who shows interest, but it's going to be kind of a down the road thing. But you keep them connected with them, so when an opportunity comes up, that they think of you first. There are people who are just great connectors, like someone who might not ever hire you, but will say, oh, let me introduce you to this person. And not only will they give you the name, they'll make a real email introduction or phone introduction, or I'll meet up for coffee, go the extra mile to like connect you with somebody important. And then there's the 4th person who like is a completely will waste your fucking time. Like, someone who's like, oh, I got this going on, whatever. And I learned that pretty early on, that will just burn your energy and hours and just like, are spinning their wheels. So like, I think learning how to identify those people is important. Understanding that like there are people who will love your work and will always, and that's great when you get the feedback too, and that's a great part of it. But then there's the people who will actually hire you and are like, I'm going to spend money on this person, and it's hard to find because it's not like there's a title at a company, guy who actually spends money or girl who spends money. It's like it's not always the same person, and there's a certain attribute to that person. They control a budget, they're willing to take a chance on something, and they're an advocate of like what you're doing, and they've shown that interest. So so it's tricky, and you learn a lot of this stuff by being in an organization and paying attention to what other people in your organization do and kind of
Yeah.
listen, and
Yeah.
so it's one shout out to like everyone I used to work with who taught me something. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. I don't want to go back to any of my old jobs, but I learned and did, like I really grew in those places. So even when you're in a job you hate, you're learning, you have the opportunity to learn as much as you can while you're there and learn a lot about like what you never want to do again.
Mhm.
And there was one other thing I wanted to say about this. Even if you're, laid off, let go, and sometimes that feels like depending on where you are in your career, if you take that really hard, it's sort of like, oh, what a waste this has all been, or something, or like if you change directions, that you've somehow wasted whatever you've invested in some different line of work. But so much of this stuff is transferable to any other kind of thing. And so I just, you don't have to waste any of it. You get to take whatever you want with you and apply it. And Ami, I'm wondering now, given the many spokes in your artistic wheel, what are some of the things, like, how do you decide what you want to emphasize so you're not running chaotically from animation to community art to corporate event? Or where are you in that process of uh, exploration?
I kind of wish I had a great answer for you. I think part of the things I just talked about though is like like identifying what is going to be, potentially the best. I've learned a lot of things of like what are our wastes of time. Not waste of time as far as artistically, but like as far as elements to pursue. Like, like when I have an opportunity, especially if one that's not like super lucrative, but there's some sort of like trade involved or whatever, is like whether or not this is something that I want to do. I think part of it is trying to go a little bit with what my passions are, like right now and I don't know how successful I'm going to be, but I've always had a passion for sort of doing some political work where I'm sort of engaging with people, trying to get people through my work engaged in the political process. And so every election cycle, I try to engage with that. And every time there's a legislative session, I go down and draw the legislature. I've had, I don't want to talk about it yet just because it's new, but I've had some success in connecting with some political organizations and I have some work coming up, and it's a small step. It's not something which is earth shattering, but it was something where I cold called it. I kind of went out and went for it as opposed to someone approaching me, and I think that feels really good. So I think that having my passion driving me to a certain extent, and also with the music stuff, like I don't make, obviously music is not super lucrative unless you get that Taylor Swift account, but it's like I'm trying to figure out a way to build a business around, and I've had some successes, and I'm kind of trying to build on that. So I think it's identifying things that have been working for me and trying to double down on them to make them more successful, and then going with things that feel right. And there's a couple things that like have come my way or been suggested that I think could have made money at, but they just felt kind of wrong. Either they felt wrong for some sort of just like the character of them, a little bit, something I didn't really believe in, or I felt maybe believed against, or something I just felt like it was, I was barking up it just didn't mean anything. And it made, so I think part of it is just like continuously weighing those things. Like, how do I feel about something based upon my past experience? What's the version of success and how can I go after it again? I don't know if that's a great, I am a little bit in a sort of wheel spinning place right now, where I'm trying to like land something. Like my goal is to land at least something that's just a little more, I can kind of sink my teeth into for long periods of time, as opposed to kind of running from one thing to the next. But I'm actually going to start teaching in the fall too, which is cool. So I'm
Yeah.
enjoying that. But yeah, so I think I'm in that place still, what I'm sort of figuring out, even though I don't know, it's just a weird answer. I have a few things that I know are going on and I'm excited about, but I also I'm still in that space where I'm not quite sure exactly what next month is going to be like. And I also sometimes, and one thing I think is important is try to, and this is really hard, separate in my mind like success as far as the work I'm doing, the impact it's having on the people who are seeing it, or or the world or whatever, and financial success. Like I mean, and financial success is super important, and I have to focus on it. but like sometimes you beat yourself up because you're like, oh man, it's not going that well, but yet you're connecting with a lot of people, making a lot of impact. And so you have to be able to still celebrate that while still like worrying about money like everyone does. So what you kind of realize is, and you see this all the time with like, people with a certain modicum of like celebrity, and you think, well, they must be doing really well. But, you don't realize that it doesn't always correlate with financial success,
Then you see them doing a dentures commercial and you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, they got bills to pay too.
Yeah. And I'll say this just once, but like, when you see artists on Instagram saying, I'm doing dog portraits or cat portraits, means nobody really likes to do that. I
Some
mean,
people may really love to do that.
no,
That might
maybe
be their
some
whole
people
bread and
do.
butter.
Some people do. Some people, and that's their thing, But when you
Yeah.
see someone who never you saw that do that before is doing that, it's because they're like, okay, it's things I need to make some money, and that seems like a quick way to do it, and not to say and you should hire that person because they can probably do a good job, but but it just I think you have to say, okay, I'm doing these things, these people, it's made a lot of impact, people have, it's been successful in what it was meant to do, so I need to celebrate that, and then figure out how I can get paid more for it, or like, I mean, you've done half the work. I think the only downside is, and I don't know if this is a downside, is like I had this a little bit in group therapy. I think especially early on, is because I kind of carried myself in kind of an even manner usually compared to at least to some other people in the group. So people always kind of thought like, well, Ami's okay, and I kind of grew
Mm,
up that way, like kind of tended to myself sometimes, and everyone's like, oh, he seems to be doing. So I think people think you're doing pretty well, and so which is good, but like sometimes people aren't like, oh, this person, this would be a good time for me to like throw him a bone or something like that, which is, to be honest, like sometimes that's nice in the world.
yeah.
So it's like a balance between being like, listen, I am okay and I am doing okay, but like I could, I'm a little on edge, but I could use, if someone's like thinking about this now, it's a good time to hook me up with it. But also maintaining sort of, that like you don't want people to think that you're falling apart, and like, you don't, I mean, this is just a thing. You don't want people to feel sorry for you and say, oh, I need to, whatever, and that's not a good way to be successful. So, but I think I definitely have had that in my life. I mean, I think that's been a problem for me in general. And I think it helped me to go to that therapy and be able to kind of unwind that, because if people think you're just kind of okay all the time and whatever, then, you're seen as sort of, two-dimensional, I think a little bit. And I think it didn't help well in like relationships and other kinds of things. It's nice to be able to understand that even though, you're a good person, or you kind of have your shit together, like, you have your ups and downs too, and like, um, I'm trying to get to a place where I can be more open about that, and share that, so.
Yeah. And I think what you talked about, like decoupling success from income, is really liberating because then your sense of yourself is not riding on how much money is coming in. You're still connected to like why you're doing it and what kind of impact you want to see out in the world, and you're able to receive people's positive feedback without immediately turning around and being like, yeah, but I'm broke, so like what's the point,
Mhm.
but and I think you're also right that like it is a delicate balance to, I think if you're going to engage in that decoupling, which I wish more people were doing, but is not the like thing we're taught to believe, that when you do that, you also have to be vulnerable in a way. Like capitalism wants like one picture of success, which is wealth and hard work and like endless hard work and increasing productivity and increasing profits. And then our whole sense of self gets tied to like that idea of self, which is very hollow and unfulfilling. And so if we're gonna like step away from that narrative and be like, yeah, I need money and money's important in this world, life is expensive, but also my success is not riding on that. There are ways that we have to like then communicate to the world that we're like not in the major paradigm, like we're not buying into that. And I think people sometimes want to hear the real story. Like we just don't want to see like millionaire influencers on Instagram and like imagine imagine ourselves never achieving the success of celebrity status. I'm jumbling this up, I think, and maybe it's not being clear, but I I think you're right that we have to also say like, "Hey, it'd be great if there's any customers around," or like, "This is a time when some money would be helpful if you're looking to spend money on art, like consider me. It'd be great to have a little boost and support." And other times, you don't have to talk about that. Things are kind of working. I don't know. Did that make sense to you? Maybe I'm
Yeah.
just repeating whatever. Anyway.
No, yeah, and I would add too that like, on top of that, to you saying like knowing the stories, like I go to the creative mornings, we talked about these creative talks, and my favorite creative mornings talks are when people are like, this is how I've gotten from point A to point B. Like there's a tendency sometimes in this like in this world, like, and like, you see go on LinkedIn and everyone quotes Brene Brown, and I think what she has to say is a lot of value. People will just kind of repeat these platitudes all the time about vulnerability and whatever. And sometimes I'm just like, I want to know if you're successful as an artist or whatever, how did you get there? Like, what did you do? Like, and like, how did you really like, do you make money? Do you actually, remember we've done this little group for a while, a peer group, when I kind of wanted to bring that out where people were very honest about like how they made their money, how they connected with clients, how they like, built their following, built their practice, whatever it was, so that you can really understand like, you know, this person is I'm looking at as successful as an artist, but they sold 3 houses, they flipped 3 houses last year, and that's how they actually made their
Right,
money.
right.
Not to diss that person, if you can make money somewhere else and support your art practice, awesome. But just like it's
Sure.
good to know that thing, both for your own sort of like sense of self, but also like, how are things happening? How do
Yeah.
I make these things go? Like you go to your high school reunion and everyone's like, this guy's so successful. Look at his like his yacht and his house in the Hamptons. But you're like, oh, how do you make his money? He dumped a bunch of like bad mortgage like investment products before the bust and made out like a bandit. And you're like, is this to be celebrated because he's got all this money? What did he do? Nothing.
Right.
In fact, he probably created a lot of, you know, a lot of heartache for a lot of people, So like understanding how things work behind the scenes. I mean, yeah, this whole influencer culture. I mean, I like Instagram because I connect with a lot of artists and things like that, and it's a good forum for it. But like to try to like detach yourself from thinking there's any sort of real reality in there, I mean, the more quote unquote reality you see out there, the less real it is. Reality television is not real. Documentaries often even have these very specific point of views that are telling, I like, it's hard to even watch the news without watching just like straight news, because everything is spun to a certain extent. Not everything, but you know what I mean? It's like, what's the real story? What's everyone's real reality? And, and give yourself some grace that like you're not like failing or whatever because you're not living up to whatever you're seeing out there. Now I'm getting on this whole tirade of social media, which is kind of a tired thing a little bit,
We're going
but
to
for
get
me,
into that in the episode on the hanged
yeah.
one,
But
two
yeah, I
episodes
really want to
later.
know. I really want to know like what people are doing and how they're doing. And like, if you're not doing well, I want to know it too. Not because I'm having any sort of Schadenfreude. It's just because I want to understand that, it's nice to hear sometimes that people are like, yes,
It's hard
shit's
out here.
hard. And, it makes
Yeah.
you feel, okay, I'm not like just doing it wrong. It's just, it's a tough business, or it's
Yeah.
a tough world, and, you don't have to, on top of trying to solve whatever financial issues you may have, you don't have to beat yourself up on it, or feel
Right. On
less
top of it.
because of anything. So,
Yeah. So let's talk about before we wrap up, let's talk about your one. I don't know if this is true, but the Central Texas You see it. This is where you paint utility boxes. Start,
Yeah.
yeah, talk about how that started and talk about like what it's becoming.
So the CTX UBP, the
Yes.
Central Texas Utility
It,
Beautification Project, is a pilot program that I've been working on with the an Austin street artist who I'm very close with. It's called his name is the Angry Cloud. Anyway, we've been kind of working on this program where the thesis is basically, if you drive around Austin, and this is a lot of cities, not just Austin, there's a lot of these utility structures basically on every corner, whether they be like the
metal boxes that have
metal boxes, yeah,
wires in them for traffic lights and
traffic lights, electricity, they're telecom, some of them, and they're everywhere. And they're kind of brutalist and kind of terrible looking, depressing looking,
they're like
even.
beige or gray.
But what happens is there's a cycle of they get tagged, and then the city like has this program where they paint over them, but it's the most unsatisfactory, fixing of graffiti ever. It's just like this sloppy recycled paint. I understand they don't have money to go and make it look pristine every time. I get it. And so it turns into this like very unsatisfactory result for everyone. And so, I would drive by these boxes and I'm like, it's just kind of a blight, and it's like, why do people need to look at these? But there are also these perfect spaces for creating art, So instead of like looking at them as like, looking at them again is like something just like the subway. It's like, this is a place for creativity and for, something interesting. And so I started painting them, and just like go out in the middle of the day, paint them, nobody really cares. And people love it. People in the neighborhood, I'll go down, I'll put a nice bright color coat of paint on it for, I'll scrape them off, put a nice bright color paint and just paint something on it. And people in the neighborhood would love it because, before it was just like this gray box and now there's a little bit of color and, you know, there's something happening, and something interesting to look at, and I was painting one in front of this, with the Angry Cloud, the Angry Cloud was actually painting it. I was just observing. Anyway, it was in front of this acupuncture studio school, and the head of the school came out and she asked me what I was doing. I was like, we're painting these boxes. It's part of a program to sort of like create something beautiful and interesting out of these little places. Also, I'm trying to bring in other artists to give them an opportunity to paint in these boxes. And she's like, well, have you heard of the term of urban acupuncture? And I'm like, no, what's that? And basically it's sort of this thesis that, by injecting little points of change in the landscape, you can kind of create like, just like you put little needles and little pressure points in your body, it kind of creates this ripple effect throughout your system that kind of creates something more positive. So by putting these little pieces of art in these kind of depressing, blighted structures, it kind of, it's bigger than the sum, greater than the sum of its parts. It kind of creates this effect upon people and just the way they go through their lives. It's, kind of is better for the betterment of society, just like going through your daily life and feeling better about everything, just because these little points are kind of have been considered and made beautiful and made more interesting. So it really stuck with me, and I'm like, I feel like that's what I'm doing, and what we're doing. And another thing about it is like, people will say, oh, I hate these tags and whatever on the graffiti, and most people look, but I love like Shepard Fairey and I love Banksy and I love all these street artists, and I'm like, where do you think they came from? Like they all started out doing that, and that's a part of the vocation. And what graffiti really is for most people who have taken this up over the past 50, 60 years, since it's been a established subculture, is like these people are really looking to express themselves and find a certain modicum of recognition. You might think it's a scrawl, but amongst some people, that's an identifier, and they understand that this person is going out there and doing the work and putting their name out there, even if some people think it looks ugly, and so I also would love to elevate some of those artists. I mean, in the designs that we do, we'll incorporate some of the tags or little drawings or things like that already exist on these boxes. So we're not just like paving over and saying we're taking the space back, but someone already started something here and someone's being out there doing something. Let's elevate them and amplify them and kind of build off of what they've done. And I'm hoping to bring in some of the artists who are doing that, some of the artists who are not able to sort of, you know, there's a lot of like city grants for arts and things like that, but I found sometimes they're difficult to navigate. Like, it's like being president. Like the person who's the president is not necessarily the best at being the president. They're the best at running for president. And I feel
Mm.
like the same way for artists. It's like, you know, some artists are not great at writing a grant proposal or filling out an application, whatever, and they shouldn't be. I'm not looking for you for your writing skills, and most of them are using Chat GPT 3 anyway, or 4, whatever it is now. I'm interested in like the work you're doing. So if for us, we want to be curators and say, I see that what you're doing. I see the effort you're putting out there. I see all these stuff, and I'm going to give you an opportunity. I'm not going to make you jump through 7 hoops more than you've already done to make all this work, just to fill out and use the right keywords in an application. And then there's
Yeah.
also, private arts organizations who like, embrace certain people, and like, certain people do well in that. And I'm not looking to diss these people or, whatever, but I think there's a certain set of artists who I think fall in between these different current like people ways of supporting artists, and I want to hopefully try to give them the space to create as well, and put it on ourselves to be the curators and find them and facilitate that, as opposed to them having to finagle the system and figuring out the best way to do it. So so this program is still sort of in its infancy. I'm trying to raise money. There's a patreon.com, CTX UBP. Again, that's the Central Texas Utility Beautification Project. If you say CTX UBP a few times, it'll start to roll off the tongue. It'll be like CTX UBP. It'll kind of like a spirit. So if you got anyone is interested in supporting it, there's little perks if you join. Like I tell people, well, we're painting, they can come. You get a little postcard in the mail, some little relics of the things, and also, if people are up for it, we do box sponsorship. So if people want to pay for an entire box, but also looking to kind of move out into other municipalities, like which don't have big budgets, but like have some areas and they want to create. So we can work with a municipality, come in and bring a bunch of artists, work with some local artists, and kind of beautify some things which kind of look blighted, and just kind of like, again, that idea of urban acupuncture, these little points of color and art to kind of like brighten up sort of everyone's existence just a little bit.
Yeah, it feels very Wheel of Fortune in several ways. Like I'm just thinking of some random person driving their usual route home from work, and maybe when they left in the morning, they weren't even looking, but like they remember it from the day before, but suddenly this box is like totally different than it used to be, and it's much more pleasurable, and they're sitting there at the traffic light, like, just can they get home already? And they have, if they're not looking at their phone, hopefully they can look at this box that's now bright and vibrant, and also feel like, oh, someone cared enough to come paint this thing. And I'm sure they can assume that the city didn't send someone, because our, yeah, they're just trying to keep our sewers running and our air conditioners functioning. But yeah, like really having these like random encounters. And I know you also have random encounters, as you said, like neighbors will come out and talk with you, and it creates these connections. And so if you're out there listening to this idea and feeling like, wow, what a cool project, I wish this existed in my city, or I'm just glad it exists on the planet somewhere, check out Ami and Angry Cloud's Patreon. You can make a contribution and kind of follow the project and see how it's going and share it with your artist friends. Um, yeah,
For just
Ami,
the cost of 1 cup of coffee a month,
there
you
you
know.
go. There you go. We can all hopefully afford a cup of coffee. Donate, donate to the artists in your life. Um, Ami, thank you so much for having this conversation. I really celebrate you for the work you do and the color and legacy I think you bring to life where we are. And it's also cool to collaborate with you and to be your friend who met you in group therapy.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate you. I mean, and all this stuff, like all that you've helped me with, and all that you've put out in the world all the time. I mean, this podcast, I listen quite a bit, and like the different points of view has been really helpful for me, and also just like all the little things that you do in all these different ways, like facilitating people and also just creating beautiful things. And I hope we get to make more things together.
Yes, I do too. And friends, you can purchase the book that Ami and I created together, which has journaling and creative prompts for every card in the tarot. This book will help you learn the tarot in deeper, embodied ways, and it will also help you connect with yourself in big, powerful, magical ways. And it's filled with these wonderful illustrations that Ami created. You'll find an octopi, you'll find a slug who might be smoking opium, you'll find a raccoon sitting on a bunch of hearts. There's lots of little details you can pick out and explore. It
Yeah,
really
I
brings.
have mine and I've been doodling in it too. So
Oh,
I've,
Ami's using his book. Yay. Your yours is gonna look a lot better than mine when it's finished. But the illustrations are line drawings, so they can also be like spaces for
yeah,
color. The whole cover is like a beautiful coloring book page.
go color everyone. It'll make
Go
you feel better.
color. You will feel better. You can find Ami on the Instagrams at Ami Rocks 73. And then you also have Gonzo Viz,
Yeah.
GONZOVIZ on Instagram. And you
Mhm.
can find Ami if you want to hire him for a corporate event or for a party or some cool eclectic artistic thing or a community art project. You can find Ami and his work at gonzoviz.com. All of these links will be in the show notes as well as his utility box Patreon. So look there and check him out.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Extra thanks to Ami for coming on the show and illustrating our podcast logo, which I love. I have stickers with this logo on it, and I am willing to send you 2 stickers if you reach out and send me your mailing address. I'll send you 1 sticker to put on your water bottle or your journal or your laptop or whatever. And I'll send you an extra sticker that you can sort of graffiti stick somewhere in your town so we can spread the magic across the
They use,
lands.
they use the word slap. Slap is the word.
Oh, okay. Thank you. um, yeah, thank y'all for listening. Check out the book. I'll be back soon with a microdose episode where I'm going to talk about the Hermit and the Wheel of Fortune together. And I just appreciate y'all being here. I appreciate you listening. I imagine you're out there being a creative spirit, trying to do cool things, express yourself in a capitalist world that makes it hard. So I celebrate you and encourage you and hope to hear from you soon, maybe in my Patreon, maybe in my inbox. Take care.